Hello friends, we've decided to launch a new website, and in order to introduce it, we're going to do it in what we think is an innovative way. We're going to have a conversation, although some of you who have been with us over weekends, it won't be so new to you. But we're going to have a conversation about something that happened to us when we were on a trip to Uganda and Kenya.
Okay, I remember that we had done, this was only last year, the end of last year, we conducted 2 marriage workshops in and around Nairobi, and we were headed across to Uganda to do one there. And I was pretty weary by then because it takes a lot out of us to do a workshop. And I just remember Nairobi airport security. I think we had to go through 4, and because I've got knee replacement, I have to be searched at every one. And by the time I got through there, I was so overwhelmed and exhausted. And then we got in the car, and we'd been told it was a 2-hour trip to where we were going, but it took us 5 hours, and we were actually sitting in traffic for a whole one of those hours. And
we weren't moving much at all, were we?
We were not. And by this stage, I'm getting quite agitated. But I realised in hindsight that I started to take it out on you, because there was this expectation in me that I didn't know at the time, that I didn't expect you to be there for me emotionally. Firstly, I couldn't tell you what I was feeling anyway, but there was the expectation that you wouldn't be there. So I got very negative and started being very critical of you when I sensed your reaction.
Yeah, after the marriage retreats that we'd been doing in Kenya, I was quite elated. We had had some good opportunities with couples, and we'd seen some really strong breakthroughs. And even in our conversation, I can remember that you came to a place of a new insight, and I was felt quite liberated by it all, and was on a high. And so when we approached the airport in Nairobi and things began to sort of go a little bit pear-shaped, I held on to the sense of joy, but it was very quickly being dissipated as we went through each little incident. And when we were sitting in that traffic on the way to where we were going in Uganda, and there was no movement, and I could sense your frustration and something else, something beyond the frustration was happening. And I had that familiar feeling of, whoa, what's happening here? And feeling powerless and not being able to make any difference in it.
We kind of are used to the volcano, and when we came back, we tried to understand what was happening for us up the top of the volcano.
What, back here in Australia?
Yeah. At the time, there was so much emotional arousal, I don't think we could figure it out.
Now, there was a little bit of emotional arousal, but I mean, we got to the venue.
But we drew a volcano, didn't we? Just so we could try and understand it. And what was happening for me up the top of the volcano was negativity, confusion, overwhelm. And then when I sensed your withdrawal and your resentment, I got very negative, and I started getting critical and attacking of you. Then we were in real trouble. What was happening for you at the top of the volcano?
Well, actually, this is a familiar pattern for me. As soon as I sense that negativity and that pattern in you, I become resentful. I can remember thinking back there and what happened as we just went through the procedure at Nairobi Airport. I began tabulating your wrongdoings. And I do this internally, and even though on the outside I'm polite, and
on the inside you're self-righteous, judging and distant.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so I can hang on to that being polite and nice and trying to manage things for a little while, but sooner or later it comes over into harshness and my resentment is not hidden. And what have I got over here?
You become overly responsible. And when we got there, that's what you did. You became overly responsible. Yeah. Just explain for those that might know what this volcano's about.
Oh, we use this volcano everywhere we go when we're doing workshops, because for me it was a really graphic way of depicting of what was happening internally for me, because I was out of touch with that anyway. And so what we do is we say, as people, we're like volcanoes. Everybody sees what comes out of the top, but the real power of the volcano is down here underneath. And this is where these feelings up here come from. We call these secondary feelings, and these ones are primary feelings. But these secondary ones are the ones that you and I are familiar with when we come into these incidences or situations in our life.
And we've done a lot of work on this over the years, and we've come to some good understanding of each other. But this one broadsided me, just the depth of it. And we then went in to conduct this marriage retreat with all this going on, and God graciously used our giftedness anyway, and we were able to establish some connection in our presenting of that workshop. But when we got back home, there was some leftover stuff. And for me, down the bottom of the volcano, I went into real grief. And I didn't know what I was grieving about, because even though I couldn't verbalize it at the time, I felt very alone and abandoned and rejected, hurt, pain, very bruised. And I didn't quite know what the grief was. But you were feeling things when we got back too, below the line.
Yeah, when those things happen, and it just seems, to my thinking is, it just derails you, and you become just completely absorbed in this space, and it looks quite dark and formidable, and I panic. The feelings that I have down here are, I'm powerless. I can't reverse this. I can't change this. And then when we're doing a weekend or something like that, I'm thinking, well, we have to be connected for these people. And I feel, but you're my partner and you're not there. And I feel that I'm abandoned. I'm alone on this. And I grieve that we're in this place again. And so I have real struggle. And of course I feel incredibly inadequate. I can't fix it. And I know that I'm not meant to, but I just feel that powerlessness, and sometimes I become over-functioning and overly responsible.
I was in such grief when we came back and not knowing what it was, that I took myself away on a spiritual retreat because I wanted to take it before God and try and understand what was happening for me and why it went so deep this time, because it was a massive trigger for me.
Yeah, I noticed that the intensity of this was it surprised me. It was a lot more than, I mean, we'd been here before, it was a familiar place, and yet this one had a bit more energy for you.
I decided that I'd structure my retreat and I'd write 3 letters. What I was forgiving myself for, what I was forgiving you for, or trying to forgive you for, and what was the third one? What I wanted you to forgive me for. So I was trying to understand what part I'd played in it and what part you'd played in it.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things I wrote down of what I was forgiving myself for, I felt like, I always say that you train people how to treat you. And, I'm very gifted at one level, but there's some quite dark parts of me that I have found over the years quite unacceptable. And it is what happened in Nairobi. It's that overwhelmness, it's that really high sensitivity to environmental things that overwhelm my senses, and my response to that. So I haven't liked that part of me, and I've tried to annihilate that part of me. And I think I've given you permission to join me in that.
Yeah, when we wrote the letters, some of the what I was writing, what you were writing, were very similar. So when you talk about these parts in yourself that you don't like, are they similar to the parts that I wrote down that I didn't like?
Definitely, absolutely, definitely.
Well, give us an example.
Oh, the overwhelmed, my response to that. But I only really understood my response to that is because we trigger each other in that. As soon as you feel that part of me that I don't like and you don't like, you go straight into your side of the top of the volcano and I go straight into mine, and that we get stuck up there, and that becomes our destructive cycle. And I had to forgive myself for not honoring those parts, because that's how God made me. And I've been really asking him since then that I might honor those parts. And I guess I wanted to forgive myself also for not living with integrity and for not really knowing who I am. For years, I believe I tried to be what you wanted me to be and what I thought everybody else wanted me to be, because it has been communicated to me so many times over the years that those parts, get rid of them, don't have them. And then I wrote a letter to you saying that I forgive you for. And forgiveness, I know, is a process, but I wanted to start putting them down and making a decision inside that, and that makes me quite emotional, that I want to forgive you for these things that have really hurt me over the years. And you did write that letter to me of forgiveness, so I'm going to use your words. I needed to forgive you for you're unavailable to me in times of emotional need, when you would just shut down and distance, and for taking my pain-laden, confused and overwhelmed responses as personal. I think you saw them as something that I did to you to hurt you, instead of this is who I am, this is me. And for your anger and your harshness and your stony withdrawal, and they were your words that you acknowledged.
I think when I think of those letters, I think that for me the two things came together on the stark realisation that I had that, we used to talk about messages you got from your family of origin, and I remember what you said, it was you're the cause of all the problems. And
that was my mother's message to me growing up. We'd all be better off if you weren't around.
And I began to think about what happened for me when these things occur, and it's that idea that, well, you're just making something difficult more difficult. And I recognised at that point that even though I may not have said it, that my actions, that my behaviour conveyed to you the message that exactly what you received from your family of origin, you're the cause of all the problems. If you were doing something, if you were doing it differently, this wouldn't be happening.
And it's deeper than that. If you were someone else, this wouldn't be happening.
Well, I think I wrote in my letter that I wanted to execute that part of you. It was I didn't want that part. I wanted the nice parts, but not that part which I considered was not nice.
Yeah, and that kind of just fitted my template of I don't like those things about myself either, so I want to get rid of them. So, again and again we've returned to that cycle where that's been going on. What about for you, when you got back and you decided that you'd write some letters too?
You came back from the retreat, and I stayed at home, and I was supposed to be having a retreat. I think I got into one letter, but I couldn't finish all of them, and it took me some months before I got back to them. But yeah, I wrote the letters. The first one I wrote was what I forgave you for, and so that was like a review of what our relationship and what had been happening in it. And I found that quite illuminating for me, in that the one that I guess I really hang on to was I wanted you to see me for who I was, not for what I did. And that's been a bit of a familiar refrain in my life, once again going back to family of origin and some of the messages I got from my perception of the messages I got from my parents.
Which was?
I'm not good enough. You've got to do better. You've got to perform. You've got to function. You've got to be responsible. All of the things which I did in Uganda in response to what was happening to you, they just kick in, and what is a beautiful gift sometimes, most times, in those situations gets in the way of what God's doing in my life. It's in the way of our relationship.
Yeah, and I believe that both of us, when we're up the top of the volcano, are just operating out of those wounds that had not yet been deeply healed.
And the other thing that I discovered was that when I'm in that place, I feel completely abandoned. I feel that my perception is that you're handing me all the problems at that moment, and you deal with it, and you're not available to be part of it, which is really hard for me, because I've got used to having you beside me in those situations, and you're a good problem solver, and you're good in a crisis. And so all of a sudden I lose a valuable asset, a valuable part of our relationship, and it's not available to me.
But there's more to that too. When I was writing to you, asking you to forgive me, it was for not really seeing you, your passion, and the part of you that wants to make a difference. And in those, when we go around the top of the volcano, I wouldn't see any of that. I'd just see how you were responding to me. I couldn't see you. And so I'd kind of pour contempt on you, and I'm really quite ashamed of that. It was not a nice way to act.
Yeah, I guess, thank you for saying that. The thing that came out in my writing there was those retreats are very important to me. They are an expression of my passion, my goals, my desires, my longings to have impact. And when this darkness overcomes you, it's almost as if my goal is threatened, and so it's being taken from me, and I have no control over it. I'm powerless, and
And you hate being there, don't you?
I really struggle in that place. It's as if I'm thinking of a slangish way of saying it, but it's probably better to say I feel emasculated.
Where do we go from here? Because in some sense we're still sitting with a lot of that, and when I asked you to forgive me, it was really genuine. And when I said I forgive you, it's really genuine. I'm still feeling some of the grief from it. And I guess you've been sensing that. Some of the grief is that over the years, I wish we'd have kind of got to the core of this earlier. It might have taken a lot less pain in our lives. Because when I came back this time, I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. Not if we can't deal with this. I feel we've got to the core, and I feel like we are addressing the core wounds that have caused us to respond in that way.
In what way do you feel we're addressing it?
Well, I can speak for myself. I'm addressing it in that, my expectation of you that no one's been there for me, you won't be there for me, I'm on my own, just prefaces my reaction to you. Instead of just being able to say, oh, look, I'm feeling really overwhelmed at the moment. We've just been through, all this travel. We've been through airports. I'm just in an overwhelmed place, and I just need you to understand that. Instead of saying that, I get into that negative attacking mode. Yeah, what about for you? Where do you go from here?
I can remember just sort of limping off the mountain where we were and thinking to myself, how come? It's that old performance thing and trying to be good and I'm thinking I've done all I know how to do and it's not good enough. So there was a sense of shame that I feel very uncomfortable with there. And so I knew that there was a place in my life that God was wanting me to address. And I also recognised that when we were in that place, that there was an evil, a darkness about us. And so I went to the Bible and said, well, Lord, I feel I'm in a battle with an enemy, a dark power, an evil power.
And I do believe he's trying to take us out.
And I just thought, and I don't know how to battle him. I've done all the things that I know how to do, and there's something more that's required here. And I believed it was in God's economy, not mine. And so I began searching and asking God to show me what he would like me to learn from this incident, or to where he was working in my life and what needed his touch.
And where are you up to in that?
I came back and considering it being a spiritual battle, I went into Ephesians, and as is my want in those situations, I like to read the whole book to get the context. And so I was reading back and forward, and then into your internet there a couple of articles came that threw me into the front end of the book, not the back end where the spiritual warfare is. And I began to look at what my identity was, because in reality when I looked and I said, well, how come this doesn't change, I thought to myself, it's not who I want to be. Who am I underneath all of this? Who am I? And so I started looking at the beginning of Ephesians, and I think for most of my life I've been listening to a voice put in there by my early childhood experiences that said, well, you're not good enough, you've got to do better. And I read in Ephesians that was not God's voice. His voice was saying that I was more than good enough. I was totally acceptable to him. And so the Spirit of God began to just work in my heart, and to instead of it just being a knowledge about the facts, it became more of a Hebrew sense of knowledge where it was experiential. And I began to actually take on board the fact that God sees me far differently to what those messages have named me as.
And I've seen the difference in you, actually, since you've been immersing yourself in that.
I feel the difference, and I've felt that since I've been immersed in it. But as time goes on, I also feel the encroaching patterns of a lifetime, that in a sense God pushed back for a period to give me like a window to view what is possible. And so I need to go back into Ephesians and make that part of who I am, and to see myself as God sees me. This is who I am.
I want to say thank you, and it's a heartfelt thank you for writing that letter, asking my forgiveness, and for actually naming what I knew to be true but probably couldn't verbalize, and that took a lot of courage to do that. A lot of courage to actually even look and address it instead of seeing me as the problem. So I thank you for that.
Thank you for saying that, darling. I guess the insight that I've gained from this experience is probably encapsulated by, we went for a bushwalk the other day and I started a heart-to-heart talk down in the valley behind us. And I was talking about those incidences in our life where this pattern has come to the front. And I recognise that when you go into those dark places, that I immediately begin to overfunction and in a sense compensate for your lack of function, or my perception of your lack of function. And I've always seen that as, I'm shouldering the burden. This is, I've got it myself now. I've got to cope. This is me. Paula's not going to be there for me. All of those things. And then I just recognised that in reality you were shouldering a burden that I had given to you. You were shouldering the emotion, the feeling of what was not in our relationship, what was missing, and the sadness and the longing over that. And I recognised that perhaps your burden was more than mine, and I had not seen that before.
Wow.
So
thank you for saying that. This is ongoing for us, and it's at one level it's exciting, another level it's quite painful. But we've been through enough of these to know what's on the other side is worth going for.
I think I said it to you when we were talking about it, that even though it was not pleasant where we were, I wasn't fearful, which I would normally have been. Fear is something I go to. Fear and anxiety can come up quite quickly. I wasn't fearful because we'd been through this process before, and I knew that on the other side of the pain was a better way of living. And I actually think that's what Paul's telling us in Ephesians, that there's a better way of living.
And just as well we're finding that because we're in lockdown now and we're quite enjoying being together and haven't got that sense of loneliness. So just as well it happened before all this. I think we could probably leave it there, you reckon?
Let's launch the website.
Yeah, go. And there's a lot of resources on that website that we've made available to other couples. And a lot of it's been about our journey, and which is universal. Okay.